This is an amazing time in the early days of the church when we explore one of the most intense and revealing chapters in the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Saints' experience is in far west Missouri from 1831 to 1839. This period encompasses profound highs, revelation, prophecy, and spiritual commitments, as well as some of the church's deepest lows, including expulsion, violence, and even imprisonment. Throughout all of it, though, the faithful clung to their beliefs and fulfilled prophecy despite overwhelming opposition. Let's begin by placing the story in its broader historical and social context. From the time of the earliest revelations in the early 1830s, Missouri held special significance for the church members. The Lord, through Joseph Smith, had identified Jackson County as the location of Zion, or the New Jerusalem. But as early converts poured into the area, tensions amongst the early settlers mounted. These tensions were due to several factors: the saints' growing political and economic influence, cultural and religious differences, and the church's opposition to slavery and being in a pro-slavery state. These tensions exploded into mob violence in 1833, forcing the saints to flee Jackson, Missouri, and scatter temporarily across the surrounding counties. By 1836, the Missouri State Legislature created Caldwell County specifically as a place where the saints could settle in peace. The saints established a new headquarters there, a town that they named Far West. Far West quickly became a thriving Latter-day Saint settlement. At its height, it had several thousand residents and served as the church's new center. It was there that many important events took place, including powerful revelations that are now part of the Doctrine and Covenants. Among these revelations was a critical one given to Joseph Smith on April 26, 1838, now canonized as Doctrine and Covenants, section 115. Let's look at a few key verses from this section. "For thus shall my church be called in the last days, even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Verily I say unto you, arise, and shine forth, that thy light might be a standard for the nations." This revelation not only reaffirmed the church's divine name, but also issued instructions for building up the church in that area, including plans for a temple. The Lord continued, "Let the city far west be a holy and consecrated land unto me. Let the beginning be made on the 4th day of July next, and from that time forth let my people labor diligently to build a house unto my name." This prophecy gave rise to plans for a temple in Far West. On July 4th, 1838, church leaders and members gathered to lay the cornerstones of the temple. It was a day of high hopes and sacred commitment. However, the joy was short-lived. Persecution and mob violence would again cast a shadow over the saints' efforts. By late 1838, tensions escalated between the saints and local Missourians in Caldwell and neighboring Daviess counties. The presence of an organized, fast-growing religion community that voted as a bloc and had its own militia, the Danites, was deeply unsettling to non-Mormon residents. Rumors swirled about insurrection, kingdom building, and Joseph Smith's intentions. The Election Day riot in Gallatin on August 6, 1838 was a turning point, followed by skirmishes and vigilante violence. The situation came to a head when Missouri Governor Lilburn W. Boggs issued his extermination order on October 27, 1838, declaring that the Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state. 3 days later, tragedy struck with the Hans Mill Massacre, where 17 Latter-day Saint men and boys were killed by a militia mob. In the aftermath of that violence, Joseph Smith and several other leaders were arrested under false charges of treason and conspiracy. They were held in Liberty Jail during the bitter winter of 1838 and 1839. Meanwhile, thousands of saints were forced to leave their homes in Far West under dire conditions. Their winter journey eastward towards Quincy, Illinois became a trial of faith and fortitude. Far West was left largely abandoned, but not forgotten. One of the most remarkable and often overlooked acts of faith from this time was the fulfillment of a prophecy concerning the 12 apostles. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 118, the Lord had commanded that next spring let them depart to go over the great waters, and there promulgate my gospel, the fullness thereof, and bear record of my name. Let them take leave of my saints in the city of Far West on the 26th day of April next, on the building spot of my house. Joseph received this revelation before the Battle of Crooked River when David W. Patton was killed, before Governor Boggs' extermination order, and before the massacre of Hans Mill. Yet here was the Lord commanding the 12 apostles to lay the temple cornerstone and leave for their mission to England in April of the next year. When April rolled around, the 12 debated what they should do. The command was unambiguous: leave from Far West on April 26th, after laying the cornerstone for the temple. Far West was deeply hostile territory by April of 1839. The extermination order was still in force, the prophet was in Liberty Jail, and the saints were refugees in Quincy, Illinois, 180 miles away from Far West. And the Missourians were actually aware of the prophecy. They had openly sworn by all the gods of eternity that if every other revelation given through Joseph Smith were fulfilled, this one would not be. The general feeling in the church was that under the circumstances, it was impossible to return to Far West. What would be the point of risking their lives? The temple was unlikely to ever be built. The prophet's father argued that the Lord would accept their willingness to obey for the deed. Brigham Young asked the 12, "Brethren, what will you do about this?" The reply was simple. The Lord had spoken, and it was for us to obey. The Lord had given a commandment. They believed that they should have faith to accomplish it. It was His business whether they lived or died in its accomplishment. On April 18th, the 12 left for Far West. On the night of April 25th, they arrived at Far West and spent the night in Morris Phelps' home. Morris had been taken prisoner by the mob and was still in prison. They returned to Far West, to the temple site, and under the cover of darkness, before dawn on the morning of April 26th. They laid the chief cornerstone, offered prayers, sang hymns, and ordained Wilford Woodruff and George Albert Smith to the quorum of the 12 apostles. After fulfilling the commandment that the Lord had given them, they departed for their missions. Now, each one of us play a role in the fulfilling of God's prophecies, but it takes faith. We must be willing to obey even when it feels impossible. It's not a challenge to obey easy commandments. The test is whether we will obey commandments that are hard. In the grand scheme of things, how important was it that the 12 lay the cornerstone for a temple that would likely never be built? Why bother going 200 miles out of their way to start their missions? Maybe to the history of the church, it wasn't important at all. Sometimes the reason to obey is simply because it strengthens our faith. Maybe the point of obeying the impossible commandment is to show the Lord that we will always be faithful. Perhaps it isn't an accident of history that 4 of the people at the Far West ceremony would later lead the church as prophets. Their mission to England would become one of the most successful missionary efforts in the history of the church, bringing thousands of converts from the British Isles into the fold. Though no temple was ever completed there, Far West remains a symbol of consecrated and unfinished potential. Today, the temple site is preserved as a historic location with 4 cornerstones still visible. It stands as a testament to both revelation and sacrifice. Far West represents the resilience of a people who, even while facing expulsion, prison, and the loss of homes, remained faithful to their covenants. It is a place where sacred promises were made and kept. From 1831 to 1839, the history of the saints in Missouri, especially in Far West, is a tale of great hope, shattered by fierce opposition. But it is also a story of revelation, prophetic fulfillment, and unshakable faith. In a time of persecution, the saints laid foundations for temples and missions. They honored revelation even when driven from their homes, and they showed us what it truly means to be a covenant people.